Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 38 of Cloud Foundry Weekly. As you can see, Nikki is not here with us today. He's on vacation, but I've got two friends of the pod, Fynes and Tim, back on the show. I don't have the episode counts anymore, but either through direct appearances or commentary, I think you all are both pretty engaged in the show. So thanks for coming back on today. And I think the topic for the day is that we wanted to kind of talk about some of the, let's say, value add that Tanzu brings on top of, kind of the Cloud Foundry ecosystem. So I guess we'll kind of go from there. Hey, Ram, good to see you here. I know it's probably pretty late your time, so always great to see you. So yeah, I guess that's kind of like the phrasing for the show today. Tim or Mark, anyone you want to kick it off? I know Tim, you've have some interesting background. I guess, do you want to kind of share with the audience the background that you have that are in both scenarios?
Yeah, I've along my career, I've been doing Cloud Foundry since 2015. So along that time, we've been mostly using the Tanzu, or what was called the pivotal Cloud Foundry version of things, which we had a lot of success with when I got started. But we always knew that open source Cloud Foundry was what the platform was based off of. So at one point, we evaluated OSS Cloud Foundry and took a look at that, and actually, worked on implementing it in a production scenario. So I was fortunate enough to be able to see both, the commercial end as well as the open source end. And then shortly after my experience with open source, I switched companies and then went to another company that was doing the commercial version again. So I went to the PCF, down to OSS Cloud Foundry, and then back to PCF. So have an interesting perspective there, and thought with this show coming on, I said, hey, Nick, maybe I could offer some perspective there.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a very interesting perspective or viewpoint to have. And then too, just to give a preface this too, like Tanzu is very committed to the open source CF community, and we have a lot of contributors there and doing a lot of work there throughout the years. But I think on a lot of shows we've kind of like scratched our heads of like there are certain features and subsets that are very clear within our commercial offering, but then some of them, some features that aren't quite so clear. So we thought we maybe just kind of do a kind of show, or maybe we might need a couple of shows just to try to, even for our own internal or education, just to kind of compare and contrast what you get with just pure open source versus the commercial offering from Tanzu. So that's just kind of like where we are there.
Yeah, I've seen it go in both directions. I've seen a very large company start with OSSCF and realize after a while that that's just a lot of work, and that's not their day. That's not their core raison d'etre. They would like to get their day job done.
Right.
And the point about the OSS is it's got to be the same core capability. That's the whole point. We develop as a community. We have partners in CFF, and so we all know what Cloud Foundry is, and then we can have flavors of it. But yeah, it's a very interesting space because it's not about that A or B.
Yeah, and then another shout out to Ram. He says he gets this question a lot about commercial/technical value add, and he's happy to hop on and learn from us. So yeah, and if you for those of you who don't know, Ram works on he's like one of I would say the chief evangelists at the CFF. So this is probably another topic that's very near and dear to his heart. So glad you're watching. So yeah, and I think a lot of that is just trying to kind of help document some of this just so we can go forward here. So I guess we can, there's different personas when we talk about this. We have the persona of the kind of like the platform engineer, or from the operations perspective, and then you really kind of have like the developer personas as well. so I guess maybe we can start at the kind of the platform engineering level. And I think one of the first tooling that like Tanzu implements is that we have this thing called Tanzu Ops Manager, Tanzu Operations Manager, and that's kind of like our vehicle, I would say, to make using Bosch a little bit easier. We provided an appliance that kind of wraps a lot of things. So it's been quite some time since I've touched the OSS path of that, and I know Tim, you spent some, I guess, maybe more recent time kind of going down that path.
Yeah, and I think that the OSS, the open source community and the Cloud Foundry community have done a great job, trying to make Cloud Foundry accessible from an open source perspective. I think some folks on the call may remember what it used to look like back when it was new, and definitely not something you could do in a weekend. It was something that definitely required a lot of engineering skill and practice, and I think it's gotten better since then. But and folks on the call, anybody who's been in this industry for a sufficient period of time can usually figure out an open source product within figure out how to install it at least and get it running. And I think that's the same here. But obviously the Tanzu Ops Manager gives you a more refined experience, provides some opinions that are most applicable to your common use cases when going towards Cloud Foundry. So you have, you don't have to massage YAML as much as you would going through OSS Cloud Foundry in the customization and everything else and understanding those tools. So I definitely a more refined experience there. I think it comes down to not only the installation. I think the installation is what we talk about with day one or day zero. And typically when you talk about these types of things, that's the easy part, right? That's the part that most people can figure out. It's just, what do you do after that installation, and how do you keep that running and make it successful into the future, make sure it's scalable and all of those things. So I feel like where Tanzu comes in sort of helps fill out that picture for a lot of large enterprises or small enterprises, depending on what your use case is.
Yeah, I'll layer on top of that. So I go far enough back that I remember a pre-Bosch Cloud Foundry. And I was working with a customer right in the heyday of PCF. And they went down another Cloud Foundry release path. And it didn't have that Bosch layer. To your point, Tim, it wasn't about the first install. But I'm certain Cloud Foundry owes its success in large part to that Bosch toolchain underneath. Because we have customers 10 years in that never did a reinstall. There's some foundations that have just graduated through upgrade after upgrade. Now, I'm not saying that's everywhere, or every single foundation, but that ability has been so important. But with that brings the management of what your release combination going to look like. Are you managing every single bit going into those Bosch releases? It will do the mechanical update, but you've got to supply the inputs. So I want to give a shout out to Bosch, and then the responsibility you have to keep it fed, so to speak, with new updates.
I think, yeah, for sure. Like, so again, Bosch, I think, is very underrated infrastructure automation engine. I know there's like other things that get a lot more buzz, but it definitely has a lot of, it's proven itself in quite some time of just, you having these deployments that are long lived, because in a lot of other scenarios, it's usually just to build new and destroy the old type of thing.
Right.
And I do think OpsMan is like this kind of again, a superpower that we probably don't talk about enough, of just making that easy, right? Because like if you think about it, now when I did this, like I think this is like 2013 when I attempted like to play in the OSS space, and that was a long time ago, and I was basically brand new to CF at the time, and I think back in the day you needed to do something like micro Bosch, and you essentially need to bootstrap a director somehow, right? And it was basically like you need to make a micro Bosch instance to then bootstrap the director. So you're like kind of building the VM and try to install micro Bosch, and then writing tabulating, formulating, whatever you call it, manipulating a bunch of YAML to get that to go. And then once you get a BOSH director up and going, then you can start to like then compile or build out things like BOSH deployments on top of the director, right? Like to target a IaaS and like try to get the CF deployment to work, right? So there's that going on, but I think now there's something BOSH BBL or Bubble Up, which maybe might help with the director bootstrapping, but that's still maybe some of the newer tooling to kind of bootstrap that. But it's all about getting the director and kind of YAML manipulation, I guess I would say. And I guess the great thing about Ops Manager is I hear a lot generally of like, oh, you like Cloud Foundry, you have to be a BOSH export to like work with Cloud Foundry. And I guess maybe like on the OSS side, maybe that's true, but like with Ops Manager is like you could take someone who's not an expert at all in BOSH or maybe never even seen it and give them Ops Manager, and they don't really ever need to know that, because essentially it's a UI that helps. It takes inputs that you need to make all those BOSH deployments, and then kind of takes care of that bootstrapping the director, configuring all the different IS configurations, zones and things, and just like to essentially do all that for you. And so your interface, like on the easiest path, is just I just have a UI that is just basically helping me manage and build very complex YAML files, and then managing all the codependencies of like all these different BOSH releases and like uploading different stem cell versions. A lot of magic essentially happening behind the apply changes button, right? Going on. So just
I mean, go ahead.
I was going to say, the one thing you missed, I think, Nick, that's like one of my favorite pieces is we would sometimes get annoyed at Ops Manager because it would give you an error. But what it was doing was it was saving you running a 90-minute or 60-minute, whatever would be BOSH role before you find out about that error. And so the idea that it would do there was a lot of smarts in field validation for those inputs before they get sent to the director, and that infamous apply changes role starts. And I think that that's absolutely magical, because that's where you don't have to babysit and come back in 2 hours because you made some mistake on the inputs to the system. So just want to kind of a call out there again, speaking towards making it easier for that, putting the right guardrails in there for us as operators.
I mean, I always thought that BOSH was just like this highly tuned and specialized engine, and you're sort of building the car around that engine. You're still getting the same kind of performance and benefit out of that engine, but now you have like a usable interface and something that can help you, sort of drive that to success, right? And Mark's example is perfect. And one thing you called out that I think is particularly interesting is the interoperability of the different releases, right? So I think, installing BOSH has gotten a lot easier. Installing Cloud Foundry has gotten a lot easier. But I still believe it is complicated when you want to combine Cloud Foundry with something like MySQL or something like, a specific load balancer, and making sure that your upgrade cadence is properly orchestrating all of those upgrades to ensure that they work together. And I think that's one of the bigger challenges, and that requires a good amount of sort of integration work, either from your team, in the case of open source Cloud Foundry, or from our team, which has just a fleet of people that are working towards those goals. So I think the integration is definitely a big challenge that you called out there, and something that I think is a big benefit from Ops Manager's perspective.
Tim, would you say it's just making sure you don't have a regression, or would you say it's more about the quality, the supportability, the compliance of those bits, or both? And where was your mind when you think of it that way?
Yeah, so I think both. Initially with the regression, right? So I think initially making sure that Cloud Foundry has the correct database schemas for MySQL 5.7 versus 8, for example. So if your if you're connecting to a MySQL on the back end, you have to know which Cloud Foundry release actually removes that 5.7 dependency, right? Or fully deprecates 5.7. And then going to stem cells, making sure that stem cells are properly integrated and supportable. So, I mean, a lot of these things may not be an issue, but it's definitely the responsibility of the platform operators to ensure that stuff works well together.
Yeah. You mentioned that, a good hard weekend of work to get an OSS release out, putting a kind of concrete number on it. I was down to, I think my record was about under 90 minutes for a lab install, because I was just going to Ops Manager. I'd have had them give me their vSphere credentials or sit with them and we pair on it. But you got one OVA deployment, and that's your jump box as well as your Ops Manager console. As your CLI tooling, if you want to go under the covers and debug something. But to say that you can put an entire foundation down for that first sandbox, POC, whatever you want to call it, you answer 20 questions and you're on, you're done. That's huge.
Yeah, I think even then we have I won't share any names or anything, but we actually have it was brought up internally in some of our calls, but we have a certain let's just say sales our solution architect who's leading POCs of our new generative AI tile, and he's like the conversation around Ops Manager is that it's just so easy to get going, and he was able to get, I don't know, it's like maybe like 6 POCs going, and it's like, all right, I just need half a day here. We're gonna come in here. We have download this OVA, get it going, and here's these questions that you'll need answered, and then we can get going. And it was like there's like a contrast of like, this just works, and kind of going to the CF Day saying from CF Day Germany of just like, we just get going, like we don't we're not spending a bunch of time like trying to manipulate YAML or validating things. Like I think the big thing, just having Ops Manager like validate, like, hey, like you're gonna put your DNS entries in there, it's gonna go out there and check to see if those exist, and it'll be like, hello, you didn't, these don't work, like I can't like Opsman can't resolve these DNS entries. You should go like make them, or like figure out why Opsman can't talk to that. Or like if you're plugging it into a cloud provider, it's going to go check to say, hey, I can talk to the cloud provider, or that'd be like vSphere or Google or whatever. So like just having those like sanity checks to make sure that you have like, maybe you have all your firewall connectivity working was this like a good thing, because that oh, like, well, we don't have our firewall open. Well, there goes a week, because now we got to go open we got to go open a case to the network team to make sure like we can get a firewall connection to XYZ, that type of thing. So,
you guys remember Will It Connect?
Oh, I use that prolifically.
Yeah, because that problem happens after the foundation's in, when you're gone all full multi-tenant and someone's trying to get to something.
Yes,
and of course, pain always flows downhill. I use another word sometimes, and they'll say, hey, your platform's not working. And then you find out, no, they didn't have permission from the firewall team to get to the database or external dependency. But what you describe is interesting, because if you take that bite down to the base installation, you have a similar problem. And Opsman is your Will It Connect, because it's checking. If it can't get to the infrastructure provider, if it can't get to the load balancer, you'll see an error quickly.
Yeah, I like that analogy. And when I was in the customer side, we had Will It Connect running in every foundation. That was like our first app that we put in there, and it was always like, hey, and like app team would like, I can't talk to blah 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 blah. I'm like, well, Will It Connect? Use Will It Connect. They're like, oh, well, you need to go now to the security team and request a firewall. We'll open to whatever thing you're trying to talk to, because now it's broken, and here's a template of like what rules you need to request, and what you need to update in your security plan and all that jazz. So that was just and it was so easy to use too, because it was like, hey, just go to this UI, type in this thing, like, oh well, CF can't connect to this, so try again. Right?
Yeah. Those are all the kind of tools we had to kind of create, because dealing with the developers who used to just SSH into VMs and be able to test that kind of stuff, now you have these tools that exist for the platform to kind of remove that. But another example that I had was, Mark, I was asking you the question the other day about, I was trying to inject my certificates for the front end load balancer into Ops Manager, and it was saying you can't do that. This certificate's not right. And I come to find out through documentation that it's because the RSA key that I was using or the private key I was using was not RSA. And so OpsMan knows not to allow for certificate errors as well. So that's another sort of front end check that it does prior to deployment to kind of save you some things. Because if you could imagine, if you're in day 2 and you're doing some sort of change or you're updating a certificate and then putting it in, what if you deployed that certificate and it's the wrong certificate, or it's typed or something like that? Ops Manager would stop you before the deployment.
It's a great point. I've forgotten that one, but I can tell you that cost me hours even with their tooling, because I was just, what's wrong with Ops Manager? I kept asking myself, but at least it was giving me that immediate complaint, because it would have been 15-minute minimum rolls for it to get in there past the Bosch layer, and the cadence been able to figure, okay, there's something wrong with the actual format of the cert. That was a nasty one. Thanks, Let's Encrypt.
Well, I was actually building out some new lab gear this morning, and I copied, like I had, I was adding the platform level wildcard cert, and I copied and pasted the wrong cert pair. So like I don't know, but it was immediately, it was like the key and the cert don't match. Like, try again. I was like, oh my God, thank you. Cause like it was the right format and everything. I just like grabbed the wrong like cert or key from, cause I'm actually working on like building out like 3 or 4 foundations right now. Cause we got some new lab gear and, some, pushing around some certs and things. And I just had the wrong thing in my clipboard, and that would have probably, taken so many hours to try to troubleshoot of like, why am I getting a cert error here? I
think look at the layers of the more hairy the problem has been. So I'll take you guys down to another layer. I had an organization I was working with, and they were really difficult at their IPAM team level to give you a block of IPs. They didn't like giving IPs. And they claimed they'd given us a 24, but it was really a 20/25. But OpsMan, when you give it the Bosch configuration for the networks, it'll look and it'll tell you if there's difficulty reaching the gateway from that, I believe, but it'll also tell you if there's IPs in use. And that's before we get to the true hell, which is someone has a VLAN that's set up wrong. But it's just having help at the right layers from the right tools. When it's working, it's great. It's when problems happen that we get really hard.
Yeah. And like you said, Mark, like after going through that hour and a half later, you have a fully production ready Cloud Foundry environment that is ready for high available workloads. So I mean, it's definitely got that value there.
Yeah. How has the inception been for you with the OSS? I'm intrigued because I think I haven't run Bubble in a long time. Was that the path you took?
It is. So I did do the BBL. I did install the director. I had some bumps in the road. For example, the BBL command requires resource pools. So my cluster did not have resource pools because I only have one machine, so it doesn't really matter. I wasn't able to get around that. I had to actually edit one of the shell scripts to remove the resource pools. But yeah, after that, I got the director online. It deploys a director next to a jump box, and there's no choice about whether to do that or not. It will just deploy it for you. So it is an opinionated install based on an opinionated architecture that was decided upon by the community at some point. So that's fine. But I got it up, and then the responsibility was now to install Cloud Foundry. which, you have to, get your stem cells. You make sure you got the right stem cell for your deployment, download the deployment repository, and do your Bosh deploy. And it seems like they've definitely taken a lot of the input selection out of it. You have to choose your variables that you want in terms of if you have specific configuration parameters that you need to feed into the deployment, or it'll just pick a default for you. And you also have to choose your ops files. So the ops files are sort of like special capabilities that are just kind of present within OpsMan. So if you want TCP routing, for example, that's a YAML file you have to include in, or if you want other different functionalities for your Cloud Foundry, it's pulling in through the YAML. But again, and then, deploying it, I ran into more issues just trying to get the correct parameters in place and making sure that the values matched what I needed to. And it's going now. It's been running for a while now, but it's yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's funny, we don't have a global. The world has not created a YAML debugger yet, has it?
Yeah. So this is just a very basic install. So I'm sure that this install is going to need to be customized by most people who are running this. They have to make sure that it matches their network type. I'm basically very basic network parameters, all those things.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely something that's easier on my end than probably be more complex for an enterprise.
Yeah, I would imagine too. Like, I don't know. I'm assuming at this point, like the NSX integrations that we have.
I was thinking the same.
And even now, like the newer, we have at least in some of the latest OpsMans with part of the Tanzu platform 10 release, is that we have integrations and the ability to like integrate into Avi, the Avi load balancer as well. So I'd assume that is probably not in the open source either, as well as like direct integrations into some of the kind of core ECF componentry.
I didn't see any of that. In order for me to get a load balancer up, I had to use HA proxy, and then HA proxy had to be a separate deployment. I had to request the certificates. I had to edit the YAML to insert the certificates, or I had to get a CRED hub in place to install the certificates and then reference those certificates within the HA proxy YAML. So, when you're doing things where I do this because I know how to use HA proxy. I've done HA proxy at both companies I worked for, so it wasn't a problem for me. But it's definitely something that you need to know how to operate versus our Avi integration, like you said, or just deploying a public cloud load balancer through OpsMan deployment.
And Cloud Foundry is a heck of a strong, what I call a heavy duty consumer of a load balancing service, given we have such scale in there. I can tell stories where Avi really saved really, really huge deployments because the throughput that's asked of the load balancer is really up there, and that has elastic scale too. So kind of a shout out to that. I think Avi's an awesome product, and but it's interesting because it runs everywhere. But in general, that problem of the load balancer in front of a foundation, when it's an enterprise one, when you've got 100 teams using it, when you've got several thousand, concurrently running applications, that's when it can be very messy if you haven't sized and provided the capacity around your foundation.
Yeah.
To let traffic go through.
Well, I think too, sizing like let's say you have maybe some traditional network appliances, like a hardware-based load balancer. Once that thing hits scale, you're kind of hosed, right? It's like, there's not let's just go elastically expand this appliance. You're like, no, it's going to be like a very painful, like rip and replace, outage, probably multi-hour at best, if not like a long, like swapping those out could be problematic, and then even then it's just like, well, then you just like, you're then potentially just exposing yourself to the whatever the limit of the next thing is. So like, I definitely used, did a lot of work with Avi before in the past. It's just part of as the platform scale and grew, and like, we went down the cloud native journey, we also needed to kind of take our networking along with that, so to speak, where, all right, we need a scalable load balancing solutions. And then you start getting into the conversations of like, we want like programmatic access as well. And then you get, let's do global load balancing, right? And then like Avi's great at doing global load balancing, like use that between, I want to load balance across, multiple foundations or multiple clouds and things. So yeah, it's a great plug, short and great plug for Avi. It's very nice.
Well, another thing you kind of allude to is what, like you're talking about scalability and performance and whatnot. And I think one of the things that an operator or a platform engineer needs to know like immediately is, how is my platform doing? How is it performing? And it's something that is, out of the box. Bosch provides, point in time performance metrics for all the VMs it manages. But if you want some time series, one of the little nice benefits about Tanzu, if we're talking about additional benefits from a platform engineering perspective, is Health Watch. So, I have Health Watch running. It's included, and it gives you curated dashboards into a number of different details into the platform. And I think a lot of our customers, having that, having something that has knowledge of all of these sort of Cloud Foundry-ish metrics that are really kind of obscure, right? I mean, I don't think anybody outside of our community would know what a long-running process is, or how long it takes for an LRP to kick up, or what the CC API response time means, or like all of these little things that are sort of like very important from a KPI perspective. But you have to have knowledge, right? So I think that Health Watch definitely brings that up.
You guys have been on the other side. I've walked in though, and I always remember seeing the Health Watch on a big TV. And the confidence and the comfort the team would have with green lights everywhere.
Oh yeah, I mean, Health Watch, like that was my go-to, right? Like back in the day, let's say back in the day, I feel like it's been like 20 years or whatever. But like I worked for a large retailer, and we were running most of if not all of our e-commerce and like critical digital assets on Cloud Foundry at the time. And this little thing called COVID happened, and then overnight all these online orders, like the amount of volume that everyone tried to transition to go to pickup or online delivery for groceries, and just skyrocketed. So like Health Watch was like critical, as we were just watching all these key metrics just go through the roof of like, all right, well, like Diego Memphre's running low, like let's build out another like 20 Diego VMs or Diego workers, sorry, like losing my mind here. How many more cells do we need to add today just to try to keep up with the load? So yeah, that was another I think without something like Health Watch, we would have just been blind to a lot of different things. And then seeing like another thing that came up a lot was like watching the Go Router 500 response rate. So anytime that thing went off, was like, well, either something died in the platform, which is probably not common, or some downstream dependency died, and then now it's it's throwing all kinds of errors throughout all the microservice mesh dependency situation. So that was always, anytime there's any kind of incident, we're like, well, yes, we see significant 500s on the Go routers problem, and I think there's only maybe one time where it was somewhat related to the actual platform. And it really wasn't the platform. It was actually at the ESXi layer, where there's some kind of bug at the VM, like the VM NIC level, where every now and then we'd have one of the Go routers would kind of get a little wonky and like drop, or like partially drop. And they're like, why is, Go router 20 throwing, 500s every now and then? And then you reboot the VM and it would clear. And it was like a VMX, like the VMnet 1000, or like the old version to VM 3. Yeah. So like very obscure vSphere thing, but just that was critical. Like starting to track some of those issues down. Starting with for sure.
It's funny Deshaun says green is good, and I've always said
Yeah.
like when I retire, I'm painting my house that same color green.
Yeah.
That is on Health Watch,
Yeah.
and the one that's on Concourse. That's
Uh-huh.
going to be the color of my house because it makes me happy. Like
Yeah,
that color.
all my pipelines are green, all my KPIs
Yeah,
are
it's
green.
like when I get to that
Yeah.
color, it's just happy feelings.
Nice.
Well, I have another one. Going back a couple of years, there was a security issue. You remember Dirty Cow? There was a bug in the Linux kernel that would allow for escalated privilege. It was about 2018. And, you know, we would curate the bits. We would be able to get bits ready even under embargo. So patch availability or update availability of releases would happen very, very quickly with us. And I mean, we obviously were bumping the kernel. But bumping the kernel introduced a regression. Someone on the core Linux team made it slower to apply an IP table rule to a kernel. And this particular customer was doing /32 application security groups. So they were basically creating a zero trust egress for every single AI, which translated to like tens of thousands of IP tables per VM. And this meant that once we mitigated the security concern, we ended up with this regression, and it was edgy because it was making a lot of deploys time out because taking 10 minutes. Never down, but it was an urgent thing now that we had to fix. And I believe we, within a couple of days, managed to, while waiting on a kernel update that would get rid of the regression, we figured out a way to think there was kind of a snapshot restore way of bulk applying IP tables. And it made it into the core of Diego in like 2 or 3 days. But again, the kinds of things you have to counter, if you're on your own in open source, that's going to be a long road and a painful one.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, I guess another thing too we should mention is like the stem cell level. So I do believe with the our commercial offering, support, either maybe extended support or and general support from Canonical is baked in. So if we're talking like base level, kind of OS level, you know, Ubuntu level stuff, you know, by you know, being a Tanzu customer, that's just kind of, you already get all that goodness. And then I think that extends into like, if we need to offer extended long-term support for things like maybe say some of the Xenial stuff, we were able to offer that longer than what just the open source side had as well. So again, that's, you know, that alone could be like a you know, people purchasing Linux support for their Linux operating system type of thing generally, as just a general enterprise pattern. So you know, that's all just included and baked in, and like probably something we don't talk about enough, but another great benefit of just having the, you know, the platform. And Ops Manager makes it easy as it just deploys it all and you know, orchestrates, you know, even just doing like, you know, base OS level upgrades is just all kind of automated already. So
well, that's the ironic piece, right? It's like Opsman makes upgrades easier, but it also makes it so you don't have to upgrade as much. So it's like I think, you know, the stem cell is a good example, but also the ability to do jump grades. When you have releases within open source Cloud Foundry, you're kind of held to point level upgrades, meaning your cadence is going to have to be much more frequent than some of our customers who, you know, they can do a major upgrade once every 8, you know, it's typically once every like 18 months, right? So you know, you get to a point where you're upgrading, it might take you a few months to do that, then you start planning. You can wait to do another major upgrade until, you know, now we don't recommend you do that from a security perspective. You want to stay patched, but you know, if you have you know, specific requirements where, you know, you have upgrade, you want to make sure that you're staying consistent, or you want a consistent environment that is not changing very often, you have the freedom to run under those parameters if you need to.
Well, I mean, I guess that brings up the question: is like, does the open source side have the concept of a long-term release? I don't know.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm really not sure. Like we'd have to talk to some folks from our release tooling to see, you know, what all the work that they put in order to get from, you know, point A to point J, essentially, with a single upgrade.
Yeah. So I mean, and yeah, we definitely see a lot of customers doing what we call our jump grade process, where they'll do that big jump. But then we have things like platform automation and concourse and things that are included also with, again, like within the commercial offering, where we help you bake in that platform automation where you could potentially just consume patches, to keep to make sure you're getting CVE bumps and things like that are needed from a security perspective, but then doing that major version upgrade when you can, because I think in a lot of cases too, like, and I remember again, in being in the enterprise, working around change windows and working for a large retailer, things pretty much shut down. Actually, that started moving up, right? Where like you would have the Black Friday event, but then Black Friday, Cyber Monday just kind of became like all of November, I guess, right? And they're like, well, we're actually gonna like basically after Halloween, like the change freeze went into place, where basically trying to get a change in, like any change is already like ultra high risk, and it's like, oh, I need to go, which meant you had to then go to like the review board and like plead your case of like why we need to go like unplug this device or something, or make this software change, right? So yeah, some customers may only have very finite windows where they can make large scale or maybe like more what we call high risk or more risk changes, as in you're making a large change to any kind of production system. So yeah, that's another great point here. Tim, I don't know if we're even going to get to the dev persona here, but there's so many things to cover.
Yeah. It is a long list of things.
And Deshaun says maintainably is so important. Yeah, I think that's definitely key.
I want to double click on what we saw one of our colleagues say the other day, Nick, about in an AI use case scenario. How do I get started? And this is interesting because it plays Cloud Foundry in a place that you wouldn't think, because it's more of a services only, marketplace only, or marketplace first. Because we're talking about running apps after we get to the platform. Like you said, we haven't got to dev, because typically it would be modern apps, you're building them yourselves. But the reality of it is that service broker model with Bosch driving the implementation of them is just second to none. And your Bosch foundation, sure, it'll give you the Cloud Foundry layer, but then it'll facilitate, and the service brokers can be apps that can run inside the platform, so the implementation's there. But I just thought it was really interesting to hear in 2024, our colleague goes, nobody had another better idea. We can get started today, and we know we can get this deployed in the afternoon. And think about what you're putting in there. You're putting in a place to run any kind of RAG or prototype apps. If you want to run Spring AI apps, you're going to have the gateway broker access to wherever the LLM is going to be. If you've got a GPU or even modern CPU, like we have a whole detailed thing on that. But that's Cloud Foundry at its finest. I just think I just love that speed story. I want to put it in flashing neon.
Yeah, and I think that kind of speaks. I think at the end of the day, you have open source Cloud Foundry, you have Tanzu, and at its most core capability, that CF push, it's there. You install through Ops Manager, you install through Bosch. At the end of it all, you're going to have that CF push capability. But when you need to connect to some of the most valuable enterprise level services, like you said, Spring Cloud Gateway, or our Gen AI service, or a highly available and distributed RDMS, these things are sort of the lifeblood of what Tanzu provides, and I think it connects a lot of those devs to what they need more quickly.
Well, yeah, that's So I guess a quick shout out or quick plug is that like within Tanzu platform, you get access to all of our Tanzu data services, or I think there's a Tanzu data suite where Gemfire and the Green Plum are separated, but like the core Tanzu platform, we'll call it license or whatever, gives you access to the the 4 main data services as well that you can tack on to your Cloud Foundry deployment, which are enterprise support for Postgres, MySQL, Valkey, and Rabbit, right? So like those are great services that again, that's definitely a value add from the commercial side. We mentioned Spring Cloud Gateway, Spring Cloud Services, so like an API gateway layer is included. I believe those are all in the commercial side. I don't think any of those are open source, correct? I don't know.
You to do it in open source, you'd have to basically package up your own application implementation of that Spring module. So you can use and enable Spring Cloud Gateway and build one, but you're not going to get one that's an immutable service that's declaratively set up and coming out of a marketplace. The other thing we do in there is we can configure container to container relaying from the commercial one, which is very tricky to do. Ultimately allowing for that to sit in front of an app with the guarantee nobody can go around the gateway. And so you're protecting that last mile, which is always the headache with API management. And so you don't have to go, deal with a bunch of network firewall or network security group rules. You are bulletproof. Your app is on an internal overlay network. Your gateway sits in front. I think the marketplace of services, like we talked about 2 or 3, there's like 15 of them.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then go ahead.
I'm just going to say, I just wanted to say that kind of goes back to the integration problem as well. I think as you look to gather more services, any service you deploy on the open source Cloud Foundry or the Tanzu side has to have some tie-in to your foundation, to your Cloud Foundry foundation, either through UAA or through its Cred Hub instance or through the routing layer. So all of those interconnections have to be built, right? And I feel like from an ops manager perspective, that those pipings are all sort of installed as just part of the tile engineering. But I feel like when I'm trying to get a new functionality in place alongside with Cloud Foundry, building that integration and making sure that it's connecting properly, that's another kind of big challenge.
Yeah, so that'd be a lot of YAML stitching, let's just say.
Yeah.
Between all the different deployments and try to get them to make sure like you're calling the right things.
Create a user for me in UAA that that is a service account for this tile, or that deploys a gateway to Cloud Foundry. And all of those details are kind of complicated.
You bring up we did a little thin service broker on the commercial side called the SSO tile. And it's almost funny because it essentially markets what UAA does anyway. But UAA we all know of as the engine that authenticates users logging in with the CF login typically. But what was lesser known is that UAA itself could have different identity zones, off domains. And you could create different off domains and they'd be completely independent from how people CF push or authenticate for that. But it's an incredibly powerful engine to put in everybody's space. I think I had like 600 instances of this across the foundations for a customer. And the idea was no matter which developer, whatever the true identity provider needed to be, whether it was LDAP, SiteMinder, Okta, ADFS, they would just have an OAuth server that they could bind the app to. They get the client ID and client secret, and they could use Spring Security, and they could get going. And they didn't care if it was SAML. They didn't care if it was LDAP. It had one way to do it. And UAA would almost protocol translate the security for auth for them. But the setup of these identity zones, we have a dashboard with the tooling. I was doing it this morning. I was adding Okta again to my lab. And I'm really happy I had that dashboard to set that up because that's really powerful. Then just joining the dots, that can then link into your Spring Cloud gateways. So now you can have your gateway do the implementation of ORBAC or authenticating, and then tie it in. So it's layers, right? And this is a huge shout out to UAA open source though. And I don't want to knock that because the real power is right down there.
Yeah.
I just need to make it available.
Right.
Very cool. All right, so let's see what else. Can you think of anything else, kind of like on the ops side that we haven't mentioned yet? I mean, I'm sure there's like 15 things, but
Well, yeah, I think we hit a lot of the big ones, right?
Mhm.
So installation, operability, upgrades, maintenance, integration, um, testing, that kind of thing. I mean, I think that's all kind of part and parcel to what we need as platform engineers when we're releasing something to our clients.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate that Opsman does that for me, and because I wouldn't be able to spin up environments as fast and cycle through them and do different testing with any of that if I did have to do that manually, for sure.
I'll give a real world example. So I blew up one of my labs and I was putting it together last night. And I took we call it an installation.zip, a snapshot just from the ops manager. And I'm looking at the tile count here. I have the direct Bosch, small footprint Cloud Foundry, RabbitMQ, Spring Cloud Gateway, Dataflow, Single Sign-On, Cred Hub, Gemfire as a service, Postgres as a service, MySQL as a service, and Spring Cloud Services. And my restoration process for bringing that back was deploy the ops manager, bring in the installation.zip. So now all the configurations I give ops manager are restored. And at a high level, then just hit apply changes. There was like one or two other things. But it took 4 hours, but it took me 10 minutes. Now, sure, I could have had 1,000 lines of YAML checked in somewhere, but I didn't bootload or bubble up anything. I didn't have to do because this actually took care of that initial bootstrap as well, which I thought was very cool.
Oh, question from Deshaun, very akin. How long does it take you to set up Tanzu platform from zero? Best guess. I'm guessing like an hour or two if we're just talking some of the Opsman and the CF bits and maybe some additional tiles, really.
Unless it's like the one we did, Nick, where they put, was it a hyphen in the host name?
Oh yeah, you gotta have valid DNS entries.
That hurt.
Yeah, I was like, what? There's a. That's not a. So I guess on a side note, I think that was using like Windows DNS or 80. I don't know. There's like Windows Server DNS. I guess apparently it lets you do invalid like DNS spec that's not valid. I don't know. Like I was, that was a that was a new one. I was like, wait a minute, this is how did they even get this to work? Like
I was scratching my head because the install would roll and then it would be like you couldn't log in because UAA was like, that's not an RFC compliant. QDN, and it's the security module. I'm going to go with that. I think if you have an environment to land it in, which could be as simple as a vSphere 7 box,
right?
You've got the credentials, you've got the ability for that box, have VMs on it that can reach down to vCenter and see it on the network, because that's another one. Oh, the network doesn't let you talk to vCenter, but if you've got the right landing zone, it's great. It's like
I recall like, and this was back in like 2015, when we were at like PCF 1.2. We set it up. It was like a day. It really wasn't that bad. And that was a long time ago. So I mean, I think if you're going through and you're clicking through and listening to what Opsman is telling you, which is, here, you need this. Oh, you don't need that, or take these defaults, or you don't need those defaults, or whatever. You're good. It's a couple hours.
And I want to shout out to something that's new-ish relative to that, which is the small footprint, which shaves a lot of time off that deploy just from the mechanics of it, because it's as little as 6 VMs.
Yeah, 4 to 6, I think, depending on what you deploy. Well, I guess that's another shout out too. I believe that is part of the Tanzu commercial offering as well. I don't think, if I'm aware of, there's a way to do the OSSCF with just a small footprint.
Everything.
Yeah. So and we're seeing a lot of traction too with kind of new deployments of like, hey, like you can start small and then and if you want to, like, which is a newer feature that we've introduced, that you could take that small runtime and go to the full Cloud Foundry size without doing a full reinstall.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So it's a critical add note too, because I think some people didn't start out there because they didn't want to potentially go down to a reinstall path. But hey, like you want to do a PSC, make sure this thing works. Like what you see, and you can hit the button and upgrade.
There's one other piece I think we could shout out to, which is the releases you pull down from Tanzu.
Mm-hmm.
These .pivotal files, these tarballs, are certified tested releases that we've checked for you. So correct me if I'm not wrong, Tim, but your CF release manifest has a lot of pieces in it, and they all have versions. And somebody, if this was a real compliant environment you were landing in, would probably have to go off and run a scan and approve that. And so that on day 0, but on every single subsequent day, there's a question of, am I running bits that are as compliant as it can possibly be? And who can I go after to get me an easy path to a better posture?
Yeah. I mean, at right now, it's still compiling releases for the open source side. And I'd have to say it's over 200 lines long of releases that are being compiled. So those are all things that are kind of, don't have that same sanitation ahead of time. So I think it's definitely speaks volumes in terms of reducing your audit risk, reducing your security risk in terms of gathering those kind of curated releases that have been scanned and approved.
Yeah, and I don't want to be anti-OSS. I think it's incredible that we have this community. It's just that sometimes you want someone to do that work for you of validating beyond it just worked.
Well, some of this too is just we kind of just wanted to do this show to like kind of talk through some of the things, because there are so much stuff out there that like even like, oh, the SRT is like, oh, I forgot that, like that's just our thing, right? It's not the OSS thing, so like we should probably call that out. So it's good to kind of talk through that. And like, in the end of the day, right, like we're a huge part of the open source CF community. We I think critical to that, and like we give out a lot of things to the OSS side. We also have our partners from the OSS, do a lot of things too. So like it's a great community of sharing. Shout out to SAP as well. They're another big partner in crime with us, and there are some other folks like Any9s and 520 who are also doing some great work out there as well. So like great open OSS community, and we're definitely not trying to discourage that in any way, but just make sure that we kind of highlight some of the things that we're adding on as well, just even for my own edification, so I know what's out there. But yeah, so we are coming up on 60 minutes, and we have barely even scratched the surface on the dev side. So I think we're gonna have to do a part 2 of this, where we kind of maybe focus on some of the dev features that we bring to the table. But I think this is a great anyway, a great first rendition of this, and again, shout out to Opsman. I need to make some stickers about Opsman, because I don't know, like it's part of my favorite thing. Did you say build packs? Yeah. Yes. Maybe Deshaun can help talk about build packs as well on our next show. But yeah, if you're out there, I guess I'm doing a little bit better on pre-planning. So next Thursday, it's probably going to be our last show for the year, unless we somehow sneak in another one in between then. But I don't think so. We're going to close out the year. We're going to do a home lab holiday party. So you might see my home lab. Tim and Fynes, you're more than welcome to come back on the show if you'd like, and invite friends. Deshaun, if you want to, or Keith. I even saw Keith out there too. Shout out to Keith. If anyone wants to join, we're gonna obviously have a little holiday themed party, because we're all, really close to the holidays, and I've been wanting to do some home lab talk for a while now, and actually I just had a new host generation show up 15 minutes before the show started. So I might even have some new deets on where I'm going to sink all of my money in 2025 and building out in next generation. So, yeah.
Let's geek out, man. Let's geek out.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to get some additional cams set up so I can like pan over to the lab and things. So it's gonna be fun. But yeah. And then everyone watching live, thanks for watching live, sticking with us. As always, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thumbs up, all that jazz. So you get notified when we go live and when our new shows are coming out. And then I promise I have fallen behind in the podcast format of this, so I will try to publish all the backlog of converting the stream to podcast and get it out there at cloudfoundryweekly.com. So it's going to be great. Tune in next week. We'll get the StreamYard link out a little earlier again this for this next show and go from there. But any closing thoughts before we sign off, guys?
All good.
All good, man. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. We'll do a 3, 2, 1 CFI and we'll be good. So 3, 2, 1 CFI.
CFI.